In the summer of 2014, a giant algae bloom took over Lake Erie. It was so big, you could see it from space. This algae contained a toxin that could cause vomiting and liver damage,
leaving over 500,000 people with no safe drinking water.
Residents have been served notice. Stop drinking water, don't shower, and don't let pets come near tap water.
A few days later,
hundreds of thousands of people in Ohio are breathing a sigh of relief today. The mayor of Toledo announced today the city's water is now safe to drink.
It seemed like, oh, don't worry, we got over that. The water's safe. We're going to show video of people drinking tap water and just to put you at ease.
There you go, right from the tap. And again, it's clean.
The blooms weren't toxic enough to affect the drinking water, but they kept coming back.
That made me really angry, that we've just been kind of allowing this problem to go on. We've been watching this ecosystem suffer. Why haven't we taken action until now?
In February 2019, the citizens of Toledo voted to try something unprecedented.
Breaking news tonight, the results are in.
The Lake Erie Bill of Rights has passed by a wide margin.
Lake Erie has earned some of the same legal rights as humans.
The same rights as a human being. It happened.
If you fly over this area west of Lake Erie, you'll see mostly corn and soybean fields. But that wasn't always the case. Up until the late 1800s, it was known as the Great Black Swamp. It was muddy and mosquito-infested. Indigenous communities had always just left it alone. But when European settlers arrived, they had other ideas.
They thought, oh, wow, look at all this great ground we have here. We need to conquer this land.
They drained the swamp. First, they dug trenches around the fields to siphon off the water. But the soil beneath was still too wet to grow crops. So they added these underground tubes with holes in the top. Water from the swampy soil traveled through the tubes into the ditches, where it flowed into creeks and rivers, and eventually Lake Erie. The soil could support crops and livestock, which is why we need to talk about cow shit. Each cow in a herd needs an acre of grass. That's nearly a football field. So these early farms tended to have small herds on huge swaths of land.
The whole idea is to sort of emulate the bison in olden days.
They didn't have to do anything with the waste. It slowly fertilized the soil and grew more grass. In the mid-20th century, that started to change.
Economists came up with a notion that if we got a lot of animals together, then they could grow livestock in a very rapid manner.
The equation had flipped. Instead of a small herd of cows spread out over a large area, today, thousands of cows share a very small space. The same is true for pigs and chickens. These operations are known as centralized animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. It was efficient, and meat got cheap. But this new way of raising animals created a problem. What to do with all that waste?
It's normally stored in large, what are called lagoons.
The waste is mixed with water, and eventually these lagoons fill up. So the CAFOs will have it hauled and spread out over nearby corn and soybean fields. Unlike solid manure, nutrients from this liquid mixture can travel quickly through those same tubes that keep the soil dry and into the waterways that eventually feed Lake Erie, where the phosphorus from the manure combines with warm, shallow water to create an ideal home for toxic algae. There are nearly 150 centralized animal feeding operations in the western Lake Erie basin. Each year, they produce nearly 700 million gallons of manure. Nearly 20% of it originates here in southern Michigan.
This is the Hudson Dairy CAFO right here. 3,500 cows, puts out the manure equivalent of 70,000 people every day.
Pam Taylor is a retired math teacher. She showed me what happens when these giant manure lagoons get filled up.
Watch, watch, watch.
And so that's liquid manure coming out of there?
Several times a year, Pam goes out and tests the water near these fields. Today, we're looking for orthophosphate, the main culprit in Lake Erie's recurring toxic algae blooms.
This already does not look good to me.
Anything above 0.005 parts per million can trigger a toxic algae bloom.
And we're already at 5.
At least.
The Maumee River is the main tributary to Lake Erie. It's where all these other creeks eventually end up. The orthophosphate levels in the Maumee River have been rising steadily since the mid-1990s, and algae blooms have become the new normal.
Residents in Toledo, Ohio are facing another day without tap water. They were ordered to stay away from the water over the weekend after tests showed it was toxic.
It was definitely something that made you just kind of sit back and think, this isn't right. As a mom, I have to do something.
I think there were maybe 5 or 6 of us at the very, very beginning putting pressure on those agencies that are in charge.
Could you guys sit down? I mean, this is ridiculous.
And trying to get a response from them.
And quite frankly, you look like a bunch of buffoons there.
There was nothing, and that was the first time I had heard about rights of nature.
The rights of nature movement spans communities in Pennsylvania, Ecuador, New Zealand, and elsewhere that have passed statutes recognizing the legal rights of rivers, forests, and ecosystems. Drawing on these laws, the Toledo group wrote up a document. They called it the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. It recognized the lake's right to exist, flourish, and naturally evolve.
What the Lake Erie Bill of Rights is trying to do is to say, hey, Farmer A, even though you had a permit, when you applied all of that fertilizer and it ran off into Lake Erie, that is essentially legally wrongful.
The bill recognizes Lake Erie's right to file a lawsuit if it's been harmed. And if that sounds ridiculous, consider how that right has changed over time.
Historically, there was a very small pool of actors that could come before the court and say, something has happened to me and that is wrong and you have to fix it.
If someone harmed a woman or an enslaved person, the man they were beholden to would have to bring a lawsuit on their behalf.
And so over the years, we've seen an expansion of who can come before the courts and say, my rights have been violated.
It's not just humans. Corporations can file lawsuits too. In the United States, the court has also recognized corporations' rights to make unlimited political donations and to ignore laws that conflict with the religious beliefs of their owners. The Lake Erie Bill of Rights argues that nature should have at least some of these same rights. But that creates a constitutional puzzle for the courts. Because if the corporations who raise this livestock and spread this manure have a right to do business, but the lake also has a right to be healthy, then whose rights win out?